Everybody, this is Shawn.
And I'm Frank.
And we are at the world famous Buy Hut for another episode of History in a Drink.
So tonight's drink we're going to be focusing on is Navy Grog, and we've got a little history of that, and then we're going to go into a little history of the United States Navy. But Shawn's got a little bit for us.
Exactly. So the Navy Grog is one of the signature tiki cocktails that they have here at the Buy Hut. And the cool thing about that is it's actually made with a very particular rum that they're specific to. And that rum is Pusser's rum. And you're going to find they do a couple of different drinks out of them, but that's the Navy Grog that we're drinking tonight.
Exactly. And what makes this drink so interesting is the Pusser's rum is actually the rum recipe that was used by the British Navy. And the British Navy gave rum as part of its ration all the way back to the 1650s, and then on July 31st of 1970, that was the last day that they gave a ration of rum.
So rum was doled out to the sailors as they went on. This is going back to the wooden ship times, the Royal Navy traveling, all over Her Majesty's Navy, but they would still get rum every day up to the 1970s.
Yeah.
And in fact, the rum in the 1970s, when they stopped doing it, was the exact same rum, same distillery, same recipe rum that they're drinking now, which is Pusser's rum, which is an unusual name. Where did the name come from?
So the name is actually dealing with the word purser. So on board a ship, a purser is the person in charge of the monies and the supplies on board the ship and stuff like that. And so he wanted to make sure there was enough rum to get through the voyage, because we're not talking about going out for a couple weeks or whatever. We're talking months at a time a lot of times.
So he had to really dole it out and make sure that they got to say, now when you got a dollop of rum, that was a tot.
A tot, yeah. And so what happened was, with all good words, over time they become slang, especially in the Navy, and it went from pursers, P-U-R-S-E-R, to pussers, P-U-S-S-E-R.
Excellent. So that's our drink for tonight, which is the Navy Grog. And Grog itself, that's fantastic. That is good. So, and the Grog itself, back in the British Navy, it wouldn't be just rum by itself.
No, it'd be rum and water.
Okay.
And then later on, they would add in like limes or lemons, some kind of citrus to fight off scurvy too.
So that sounds like a cocktail right there to start.
Now,
part of why they watered down the rum was not necessarily to water down the rum, just expand it on out. But you think about water in these barrels on ships that kind of got a little slimy after a while. So actually, the rum sanitized the water. So that was the whole reason for doing that. So,
and that's what we're sticking with.
And that's what we're sticking with, exactly. So let's have a little sip here. But we're not going to talk about the British Navy. We love to talk about history and American history, and especially Florida history. So we want to talk about the Navy, United States Navy, and especially around Florida.
Exactly. And really, the United States Navy around Florida starts in Key West. And it goes all the way back to 1823 with the anti-piracy. And if you were here for some of our other episodes, we talked about pirates in the Gulf of Mexico. And so the United States Navy set up in Key West, one of the farthest islands out in the Florida Keys. And it really controls the Florida Straits, which allows us to go out into the Atlantic from the Gulf. So we saw that that's where it was. And then Key West really grew up as a key naval port during the Mexican-American War, where we saw the Army and the Navy both moving ships from there to land in Veracruz and other ports. Gotcha. And then it was instrumental in the Spanish-American War.
Okay.
But it also played a role in the Civil War, because it's one of the few actual Southern forts that never falls in the hands of the Southerners.
And so this is the Key West fort that we have.
Exactly.
And they even expanded on out to have another one farther out.
Right, and that's in the Tortugas, which they call the dry Tortugas, because there wasn't any fresh water there. Yeah. But they built this massive brick fort called Fort Jefferson out there. And you can still go there today. It's part of the Dry Tortugas National Park. So that's our travel tip for today, is to head out there if you get the opportunity. It's incredible. You can camp there, but it's a camp. When you camp there, you got to bring everything in and you got to take everything out. Everything.
And no fresh water.
Right, exactly. So, and one of the little facts about Fort Jefferson goes to the assassination of Abraham Lincoln.
Okay, so we got Abraham Lincoln at the end of the Civil War. It's going on with Lincoln. Now, Lincoln was assassinated.
Correct.
And was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth.
Right. And if you remember your story from American history, John Wilkes Booth jumps off onto the stage from the box that he was in and breaks his leg.
Okay.
And hobbles out and gets away. Well, the man who set his leg, a Dr. Mudd, he is eventually arrested, and he's actually sent to Fort Jefferson because it was a prison at that time.
Now, Dr. Mudd, that's where actually the terminology came. If you ever heard, your name is Mudd, that's where it came from. So even though he really didn't understand or know that John Wilkes Booth had just done that, because he had helped out and aided and abetted, that gave him a prison term.
Yeah, but while he was there, being a doctor, they had an outbreak of yellow fever. And without him there would have been many more deaths than what actually happened.
Okay.
So that moves us up to the part of history that I really want to focus on here is World War II and looking at the Gulf of Mexico, because
now when I think of World War II, I think of obviously the war in the Atlantic, and we think of Europe, and we think of the war in the Pacific, and what's going on in Japan and then over there. It would seem like maybe the Gulf of Mexico would not be as involved.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. But what's interesting about that is from 1942 to 1943 is kind of the heyday of the German U-boat. And the German U-boats were so bold that they were coming into the Gulf of Mexico.
So through the Straits of Florida, past Cuba, past Key West.
Yep, and all the way up to New Orleans. And off of New Orleans, they sunk roughly 55 ships in about a 14-month period. And they damaged 19 others. And what only happened to them is we only know that we sunk 3 of the submarines during that period of time as well.
Now, they were in the Gulf basically to supply lines, or what was it they were sinking?
They were sinking oilers. Okay. So they we had tons of oil coming out of New Orleans and Texas going to North Africa, to England, and they wanted to cut that off. They were trying to blockade England and kind of starve it of all its key necessities. So by sinking those ships, they did it. And it was equivalent to 13 million barrels of oil that they sank on those 55 ships.
So they put a big hurting on,
they did.
On that, okay?
So the 3 U-boats that were actually sunk, one was off of New Orleans, and it was sunk on July 30th of 1942. And it was attacking a passenger ship called the Robert E. Lee. And the patrol craft PC-566 was actually escorting that ship. And so they just happened to be there when the submarine attacked. And they were able to use depth charges and sink the ship. But it's interesting, what I read about this was that they got really lucky. All of their depth charges actually blew up below the ship, except for one that landed on the hull, the top hull, and blew up right near the...
that was the only way they would have gotten.
Yeah, by the castle.
Okay.
So it sunk, and all men were lost on it. They have since found it, and you can actually go and dive on it now.
Excellent. Up near New Orleans.
Up near New Orleans. Yep. All right. And then we have 2 that were actually sunk in the Florida Straits. Mm-hmm. One by a U.S. Coast Guard cutter, and then one by a Cuban patrol ship. So the one that was sunk by the U.S. Coast Guard was sunk on July 13th of 1942. And then the one sunk by the Cubans was sunk on May 15th, 1943. And both of these were also sunk by depth charges.
Yep.
But the Straits of Florida kind of narrows where they can go through. And so it was easier for them to patrol back and forth through there.
And coordinate. Yep.
Yeah. Now, that wasn't the only place. Key West was not the only place in Florida where we saw naval activity. And part of the reason why we see that they stop attacking is we build all of these air bases along the coast of the east coast of Florida and all along the Gulf of Mexico. And we see that the civilian air patrol plays a huge role in this. And they are going to fly over 86,000 missions looking for submarines out in the Atlantic, in the Gulf of Mexico.
And that's even out of here, Sarasota, out of our Sarasota airport and during World War II.
Yeah, so Sarasota Airport was brand new at the time. It had just been built a few years earlier, and it was...
For support of the war.
Actually, no, it was built as the commercial airport, but then the war starts, and then it gets kind of drafted in, just like everybody else, into the war. And MacDill Air Force Base was there, and so it became a sub base for MacDill.
Gotcha.
And initially, they were trying to use it to train B-17 bombers, pilots, and the crews. But that the airport wasn't built for that big of aircraft. They were damaging the runways, and so they moved that squadron back to MacDill, and they brought fighter planes down here. But it's Sarasota Airport had it, but also Venice had a naval air station that did a ton of training as well. And so we have the civilian pilots going out of there and flying reconnaissance missions and
for
everything.
the civilians, their biggest job is basically go and spot, look for these submarines, and then translate that to the Navy, and then they can
and then the Navy would send ships. And being up in the air, you can see the silhouette of the submarine under the water. And so that's what they were looking for as they're flying over. And so much of the Gulf is really shallow, so they can't go that deep anyways. If they're trying to sink this off of the harbors and everything. So Key West or Venice is actually going to play a double role. In Key West, there was also a POW camp.
A POW camp?
Yeah, for Germans that were captured either on board ship in the Atlantic or from the North African campaign.
Okay.
And so they had POWs at the Venice airport, about 200 of them, give or take. Their main base or POW camp was Fort Blanding in Orlando. And then there was another one up in Jacksonville, and about 10,000 German POWs were here in Florida.
So we would bring German POWs captured over to the United States.
Yeah. And it's kind of actually sad, with this being Black History Month and everything, that when the accounts that I read from them being here, they would take them out and kind of use them as work gangs.
Like a chain gang?
Yeah. And because that's how we did it with the prisoners down here. And so they took them out and they would work them all day. But at lunchtime, a lot of times what they would do is take them to someplace local that had food. And so the German POWs got to go inside the restaurant and eat, while the African Americans who lived in the area
couldn't go
into it and had to go to the back door and get food. So they were treated better, even though they were trying to kill us. Were being treated better than our own citizens.
Gotcha.
So, and there's lots of other stories.
And that's right at the road in Venice. So
yeah, exactly. Then with that, we're going to see one of our favorite stories about the war, which is, they're called the Hooligan Navy.
The Hooligan Navy was one of the most famous hooligans of all, and this is out of Key West.
Key West and Havana.
Yeah.
And that's Ernest Hemingway.
Correct.
And he was able to finagle the military to make him and a bunch of his buddies patrol boats looking for the submarines in the Gulf.
Now Ernest Hemingway is kind of, at this point in his lifetime, he's really out of the fighting area. He's retired from his army days, or his
writing days.
So now he's in the Navy, and so he's basically commandeered his own boat.
Correct.
So now the funny story about that is, part of the reason why Hemingway did this was, during this time period, he loved to fish. And his boat, the Pilar, that was what he was famous for. Going out and the deep sea fishing, the Old Man of the Sea, for everybody who's read that. But because of World War II and because of some of the rationing that they did, they weren't allowing boats, especially fishing boats, things like that, they weren't allowing them to have fuel. So Hemingway said, he says, I'm not going to go fishing. I'm going out on patrol for you guys. And we're going to patrol between here and Havana. And I might do some fishing while we're doing that, but that's why I should be rationing some fuel on that. And even talked him into giving him some weapons too.
Yeah, and so he talked him into putting on a directional finder, so that when the submarines would come up, they would communicate with each other and communicate with their supply ships.
Yeah.
And so they had a radio directional finder on board the ship that would allow them to figure that out. I really don't think that they were sober enough to do that
probably not.
while they were doing it. And then they had Thompson submachine guns and hand grenades.
And that was all. That was their weapons to go against German submarines. Which they never found a German submarine. They never engaged in one. They did catch a lot of fish, but that was his excuse for doing that. He fought in World War II.
Yeah, and he's going to do that until 44, and then he's going to decide, well, I want to go and fight, and so he tries and gets himself attached to units that are going to go on D-Day. They don't allow him to land on D-Day, but he's famous for liberating the bar at the New York bar at the Ritz-Carlton in Paris. So somebody's got to do that.
Somebody's got to do that, exactly. So he's done his part. So, but that is absolutely one of our favorite. And actually, he even equated some of his stuff with the Hooligan Army in one of his books.
Correct. And that is Islands in the Stream. The third act of the book is really based on his time doing the patrolling and stuff in the Pacific or in the Florida
funny
States.
to be, Hemingway was kind of half Navy, half pirate, basically, in the whole thing.
Yeah,
so
all alcohol.
All alcohol. So, and speaking of alcohol, so you guys, we're going to have we love Pusser's rum so much, and they love Pusser's rum here that they've actually got 2 more drinks that they make with that. So for the next 2 weeks on Monday nights, come on back down. We've got
Next week, we're going to do the Suffering Bastard.
Yep.
And then the week after that is the Painkiller. And the Painkiller is actually a drink that they have copyrighted or the rights to, and if you really want to have a drink that's a painkiller, it has to have Pusser's rum in it.
Excellent. So, and a little bit surprised about what the lesson's going to be about, but those will be the focus. Those will be the drink focus for the next 2 weeks.
It should be interesting. Just think a Suffering Bastard and a painkiller.
Painkiller, exactly.
All right.
So that's our lesson for tonight. So I want to thank everybody who came on down and watching online. For those of you who aren't there, we're actually going to continue this on and do some trivia in the tropics here in a little bit and get rolling. So if you guys can make it down on a Monday night to the Baha'i Hut, come on down.
All right. Enjoy, and we'll see you shortly.
Excellent.